should say that I traveled a long distance, and I hope that this is a distinguished small audience, so we'll have a lively discussion. And you have to understand that there is a lot that preceded what will go on today. I have been doing a little writing and thinking about this subject since around the late 80s, when I first published a short paper called Some Problems with Animal Rights, and then later on, Do Animals Have Rights in 1991. And the only reason I ever got into this topic is that I have been a fairly diligent working bee on the topic of natural human rights. My doctoral dissertation was basically a meta-ethical one called Human Rights, a Meta-Ethical Inquiry. This was a time back in the 70s when nearly all ethical and political discussions went on the emotivist tradition and denied any cognitive significance to moral claims or political claims. And so those of us who were beginning to find this very unsatisfying had to do some very hard work to suggest reasonably successfully that when we talk about ethics and politics, we can be meaningful in this, and we're not merely expressing our feelings, our preferences, our desires, our wishes, and so forth. Up until that time, up until, in fact, John Rawls resuscitated political philosophy, a great deal of what was said in this area was dismissed as cognitively insignificant, not constituting anything that you and I could know, or that we could be wrong about. Now, I had done the work on natural rights, and then I realized that there's a great deal of talk about other forms of rights, moral rights, and animal rights. Now, with all successful concepts, or all concepts that have acquired a certain power and prestige in the community of those who talk about certain things, there's always the danger of abuse. You can now see this, that there's a proliferation of rights throughout the political community. One has a right to everything. One has a right to a happy life, or right to health care, right to a job, right to a place to live, and so on. And it is quite arguable that some of this is wishful thinking, and that there is no real basis for it. I mean, just consider, for example, if I have a right to health care, that pretty much suggests that health care professionals, like doctors and nurses, owe me their services as a matter of a right, rather than as a matter of an exchange which we have come to agree about. So that's an interesting perversion of the concept of rights, because one of the ways in which one has been familiar with the notion of rights is that it secures for one a realm of liberty, area of freedom. And here we are talking about rights that seem to do just the opposite. In other words, they essentially conscript people into involuntary servitude. So there's a great deal to talk about in connection with rights, some cleanup work to be done, and then of course there is always the issue of, are there any foundation for individual human rights in the first place? In the concern about how human beings treat animals, whether as pets, as prospective nourishment, or for medical research or experimentation, one of the schools, led by Professor Tom Regan, maintains that animals have rights quite like human beings do. And in the traditional Lockean sense, not in the more modern liberal sense of positive rights, but in the sense of negative rights. The rights not to be interfered with, not to be treated against one's will. And Regan basically maintains that because animals have a certain level of consciousness that is nearly indistinguishable from what human beings have, on which some of the ascription of rights to human beings rests, animals also have these rights. There are those like Peter Singer who do not talk about rights, but talk about something that is practically the same, namely animal liberation. Singer is something of a utilitarian, so his animal liberation thesis basically amounts to the claim that in the calculation of costs and benefits, the calculation of overall happiness or pleasure that is to be distributed throughout the world, one needs to include the pleasure and displeasure of animals, just like one needs to include it about other human beings. So these are the two main schools of animal rights and liberation that have had a fairly good run for their money over the last 25, 30 years. But there have been recent contributions to it as well, and I'll get to that in a little while when I look at some of the people who have been critical of mine. I have been a skeptic about what I have to say are so-called animal rights. I don't like to say animal rights without that qualification because that almost grants that there is something like that. I maintain that the concept of animal rights is a kind of a category mistake. It is like talking about animal guilt or Saturday taking a nap and things like that. They sound like they're perfectly meaningful sentences, but when you dig a little bit deeper, I think what you come up with is the recognition that there is no foundation for them. They're not conceptually well grounded. And here is why I have argued this, and this is only a very brief summary of my view. The concept of rights, in the sense in which we get this from John Locke and in the U.S. Declaration of Independence, and as they are deployed, for example, by Amnesty International and by other human rights watch organizations, derives from an early understanding that human beings are moral agents. In Locke, human beings are treated as free and independent, and they're free in the sense that they can make choices, and they're independent in the sense that they're not beholden as adults to others, that their cooperation, their involvement with others must be secured through their own choices, their own volition, and it's not something that you can extract from them without their consent. This is generally understood as the classical liberal view of human relationships, adult human relationships, such that however many moral obligations you may have or moral responsibilities you may have, these responsibilities or obligations need to be performed voluntarily and not coerced from you, because coercing them basically eliminates their moral significance. If you do something that is the right thing to do because I coerce you with a gun or with a threat of jail, then you are not really creditable for that good thing that you do. A soldier who's drafted and fights against his